I always wonder about that day, like for you. Like, was there anything about that day that people don't know? Like, are you going, I'm going to make history today? Or,
no.
You know what I mean? Like,
I think the misconception is that there's definitely, there's a lot of folklore about that. But
what is the craziest thing you've heard that is just not true?
Oh, well, there's this whole narrative. Someone that I planned the whole thing. I kept other skaters out of it. It was, everything was just leading towards that moment. And if you really look at the history of skating, in that year, there were best trick events and other events.
Yeah.
And I was trying 900s. Other skaters were trying 900s. We couldn't do it, but I never relied on that. So I always had a strategy where I would have a trick in mind that I knew would probably place well, that I haven't done or that I've only done a couple times. And that was my strategy for the best tricks. So when we went to the X Games, they chose the people who had done well in all the best trick events. So anyone that didn't place, maybe was just trying 900s, didn't make it, they weren't chosen.
Oh.
Because they weren't placing well.
You got to land something. You got to put some
land
numbers on the
something,
board.
right. But also in the, when it came to the X Games, the best trick events, I think that's the misperception, is that they were just afterthoughts. It was like, we're going to have the contest and the contest happened and that was the big event.
Now it's goof around.
You guys, you got 20 minutes, try stuff.
Yeah.
And it was just a bail fest and people weren't even sticking around for it because maybe you saw one or two tricks landed, but
yeah,
it was only for the hardcore skaters. So when they did it at X Games, our attitude was the same. It was like, oh, they're not even going to air it because we're just going to be falling. And so going into it, I had one trick in mind, which was a varial 720. So it's a 720 spin with my body. And then I turn my board an extra 180. So basically my board is a 900 and my body is a 720.
Right.
That was literally my best trick. I'd done it once before. And I didn't know if I could even make it in that time limit.
Right.
I made it like 10 minutes in. And then that was it. Like,
so you had one in the bag.
That was my best trick.
Now it's time to have fun.
Well, I didn't even have a plan.
Yeah.
And the announcer, Dave Duncan, who I love, still is announcing skate events. He's like, oh, maybe we're going to see that 900. And he's like,
what an asshole.
And so I thought, all right, I'll try one for the crowd. It was more like, oh, here's what it looks like. Here's an attempt.
Yeah.
And then after, I think my second or third attempt, it was really consistent and I was spotting the landing and I thought, well, just try to land it and break a rib again. So what? That was it. That was
the
my
craziest mindset to me.
Yeah.
If I break a rib again, so what?
There's like,
if you're ever gonna land something or try something, it's in that moment.
Yeah.
It's the biggest venue we've ever had. The biggest viewership, and not even viewership, just more like the most excitement.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no one had built. I mean, I heard my friend say recently, like, yeah, I was always bummed that ESPN got that, and it wasn't like in a skate only event. And I said, well, at that time, no one could have afforded to build a ramp that good. Like that was the best ramp that we ever had.
Yeah.
And that's I credit that as much as anything.
Yeah. And what was so specific about
it? Was just built really well. It was really solid. They had the money, they had the means, and so back then when you skate wooden ramps, homemade ramps, there was a lot of flaws. There were, one wall was this. One wall
really?
Yeah, or the coping was bad, or so you had to find the pockets of the ramp that were good, and that was more of what you spent your time doing. Was making the ramp work for you, and then this ramp was like
perfection.
Yeah, it's as perfect as it could be back then.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like you hear that with basketball, like there's dead spots in the Boston Garden.
Yeah, the old Garden.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and they would force Celtics defenders would force players there to get steals.
Yeah, there's just like old wood or stuff that has to be put down, and like you don't even think about that $1 billion business that could exist like in these areas. But I guess especially if you're doing these like local events back in the day, they just got to hire somebody.
Everything was terrible, so we just made it work.
Yeah.
And now I have what I consider a perfect ramp, which actually makes it hard for me because when I go out and skate other stuff, oh man, everything is a struggle. And I was just used to trash before.
Right.
And then you became awesome because you were working on the worst shit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you have that gap in your ramp?
Because it was originally for that ramp was for the Huck Jam. And so
what?
the Huck Jam was my tour that I told you about. That ramp was built for that.
Okay.
And so we had a big ramp. It was, I think, about 30 feet high that would go through that gap. And then we would jump the whole length of the ramp.
Wow.
Oh, shit.
So that's what it was.
Okay. And then you just kept the gap.
Yeah. I mean, it poses, it's fun shit.
I mean, it looks crazy on video.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks terrifying.
It can go horribly wrong.
Have you seen somebody?
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah.
Have you ever?
Yeah. No. I know exactly where to be, like there's a certain angle to getting over it. And if you're on that angle, even if you're gonna fall, you're gonna
make it the other side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more that people who don't skate the ramp that much and they don't realize the opposing wall, what they're doing. I've seen people just go through it, like where they come up, they're like, oh, there's no wall, and they just.
There's a. Do you remember the skier? His name was Bodie Miller.
Yeah.
He said something once, and it kind of like blew my mind a little bit. And he was like, "I'm not better than these guys skill wise, but I'm willing to take more risk." And the guy kind of like pushed him on it. He goes like, "I'm going to take a harder line, and I'm going to put my life on the line more than the average person will." And I always wonder, like, how much of that lends itself to the success of somebody who's doing these extreme sports. Like, do you know certain guys that are more skilled, but they just don't have the balls? You don't have to say their names, but like, do you ever look at certain guys and go like, man, if he would really throw it, he could be.
Yeah, sure. You see it a lot. And it's hard to be on the sidelines wanting to push them into it. Like, you can't be more excited for someone's career than they are.
Yeah.
But often I'll see something and sort of help someone unlock it. Because I can see that they would be capable of this. And they're just not really pushing it, or haven't even thought, oh, maybe I could take it this other way. And I've definitely helped a few people get to a certain trick or a certain technique because they just didn't see it in themselves. But other times I've seen like the most raw talent go to waste.
Just because they didn't have the...
They just don't have the drive.
Yeah, man, it's kind of crazy. You need to be able to risk it. It's
just something you can't see. Like I have often used an example. Lizzie Armanto, who's on our team. She's an awesome bowl skater. She skates Bert sometimes. But she did our full loop ramp.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And that her approach and the way that she ended up doing it, she tried. I mean, usually when we do it, it's this whole production. We got all these pads, we learn into the pads, and then we start removing pads to get closer. When she finally was ready for it, and there were no pads, she ended up falling like 4 or 5 times, but managed to get out.
Yeah,
get out of these. There's a photo of her knee sliding at 12 o'clock.
Wow.
So upside down, fully
upside down, off her board, and then sliding around. And any one of her falls would have driven someone away. Like, I'm not doing this. This is too gnarly. She just kept and yes, we're giving her pointers along the way. Those of us who've done it, but at some point, it's on her.
Yeah.
And I try to tell people that, like, you cannot teach that kind of grit or
the will. Yeah.
That's she just has that.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a certain faction of skaters, they just have that. It doesn't matter how they were guided through. It just came with it.
Yeah. There is that, like, I don't want to call it like insanity, but like that drive that the greats have, it exists in the same way. But you really need it. Like, you can get by with like good fundamentals in a sport that's not as dangerous.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like, a guy with really good fundamentals and enough size can exist in the NBA, and he can have some mid-level contracts for a while. Like, you can just 6'9", you're going to be in the NBA. But if you actually want to be one of the greats, you have to have that fucking killer thing.
Yeah,
man.
it's crazy. Have you seen the video of Nigel Houston doing the grind on the freeway? Or like
Yeah,
he'll
yeah.
grind on like his balcony,
Yeah.
like overlooking like a 30-story drop.
Oh yeah.
And he'll just like ollie pop up 50-50 then jump off. Just
Yeah,
insane.
I mean that's the least of his skills.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the being able to overcome the fear of like looking out
Yeah, if I fall,
at a
I
freeway.
die.
being
Yeah, it's like the free climbing guy. What's his
crazy.
name? Alex.
oh yeah, Alex
Honnold.
Honnold.
Yeah.
You know, just do you think you have some of that maybe? Like
Yeah,
the-
I jumped between 2 7-story buildings, downtown LA, and
Wow.
I never imagined that it wasn't going to work. You know, I think that's what it is. When you're in that kind of mode and you're presented with that sort of
yeah.
stunt or challenge, you never think like, oh, this could all go terrible. Because
Never?
that's what's going to happen.
That's the only thing I think.
Yeah.
What about that? What does that say about me? The only thing I think is
That's why you weren't there that day, jumping in with me.
yeah, there you go. 100%. I'll be on the elevator.
But do you think about that when you're on stage? Like,
On
you know-
stage beforehand, I definitely think about it. And then
Really?
when you're up there, you can't really think about.
Yeah, you're
too
just
much.
so locked in
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah.
It's like when they say if you're driving a race car, wherever your eyes go, that's where you're going to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're skating, if you think like, oh my god, what if I sketch out? What if I don't grab it? That's what happens.
It's almost liberating for me before I get on stage to be like, yeah, I might bomb. Or let's hope I don't bomb or something, just to like acknowledge the thing. And then it's like, all right, well, if it happens, it happens. You keep going. But that's it. Like I'll say to people if they're like, hey, yeah, great, I'm looking for it. I hope I don't bomb. And then I just say it to everybody, like, hey, this could happen. Let's just go do it.
Interesting.
It's weird. It takes it.
I think it's more when people go down the rabbit hole of visualizing what does that look like.
Oh yeah.
The bombing and the embarrassment.
The heat.
Yeah, me saying it just like,
Sweat
okay,
dripping
acknowledge
down
it. Now
your
it's
back.
done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy, that sweat, boy.
There's
Sounds like
nothing.
Vietnam.
Yeah.
Bro, it is. Yeah, bombing is a physical experience.
It really
in terms
is.
Of like your body. Like I would distinctly remember like drips of sweat rolling down my back.
Yes,
At
dude.
bad bombs.
Yes.
And like it.
You
It was
can-
so quiet. I was like, "Can they hear the sweat dripping down my back?" Like,
when the bomb first starts and you feel it here,
Yeah.
and then you're like, ah, shit, here it comes down the back. I know it's coming. I know it's coming.